So I made a thing. It's called Resyntax. So, can this code be simplified? Can we make this simpler?
Generally.
Yeah. Any ideas how? Yes.
We could take out the if statement entirely.
Yeah. It's the same thing as this, because, and have any of you seen anyone else write code like that? For show of hands, yeah? Yeah?
About half of the homework I graded this week.
Oh, students love this. How many of you have had to teach somebody how to make this improvement? Yeah? Yeah.
Typed Racket likes the first one, too.
Optional even better.
Yeah, sometimes we have to teach our little macros how to not deal with this. Well, then I have something for you. My name's Jack. I work for Google. I've worked there for quite a while, and one of the things I do is mentor employees on how to use Java and Google's Java libraries specifically. So I review a lot of code, like way too much, from hundreds of employees across the company. It's just a thing. It's not my main job at the company, but it's a. They call them 20% projects. And, your average code review, it's just me telling, hey, please stop using mutable data. That's by far the most common thing I say. And that means I repeat myself a lot. And I don't want to repeat myself that much. You can get resentful, it makes you mad at the people you're talking. It's not good for anybody. So, lucky for me, programmers really hate repetitive stuff like that, and have made tons of tools for this kind of thing. There's like these linters, like pylons from Python, some from JavaScript. There's like formatters that'll format your code automatically and make these problems you just don't have to talk about in the first place. And more complex static analyzers. Like, if any of you use Rust and have seen Clippy, that shit is awesome. Lots and lots of tools for this. So my day job, we're going great, but not in Racket. Racket doesn't have any of that stuff, unfortunately. And why is that? What about Racket makes tools like that hard to build? Can anyone think of something specific about Racket that might make this tricky? Maybe something starting with an M. Any ideas?
Mustard.
It's macros. It's always macros. Macros make everything hard. So macros make tools like this very difficult to write. Macros are great. I love macros. You will never, ever find me saying that macros were a bad idea. But the macro system is a terrifying monster that grants us mere mortals great power. And it comes at the cost of defying attempts by tools to understand them. Until today. Because for the last 2 years, I have been building a tool called Resyntax. And Resyntax will analyze Racket code and suggest improvements. Here, I have hooked up Resyntax to GitHub and set it up to analyze pull requests for me. And that lovely little student special that you see, here Resyntax is pointing out that we can get rid of the if, and we can rewrite it into just a number check. And that button there at the bottom will let you automatically commit the change too. Right in GitHub's UI, I love GitHub. GitHub's so good. I'm so glad I didn't have to build that web GUI myself. But what if we give Resyntax something a little harder? For instance, in this code, can you simplify this code in the same way?
No.
No, you can't. You can't do that at all. That's because we don't know if some function will return a Boolean. So what will Resyntax say about it?
Yeah.
It will tell you, hey, you're trying to turn that into a Boolean. You can use and to do that.
Is there like a two-Boolean cast function that can do that?
There isn't. There's a lovely little GitHub issue arguing about whether we should make it, and it stalled because we weren't sure what to call it. I don't want to get into that. So that's, that was a cute example, but what if we really try and bust up Resyntax and just really mess with it? Like, what if we just redefine if? And not even in like a local way with a nice let, where like, a cute little parser could maybe figure it out. Let's, go the full-blown definition context route. You need to expand out the defines and figure out scope, see what happens. So if we run Resyntax on it, now what will it say? Nice try. It will simply leave it alone because it sees that this is not the same if as the standard built-in one. How is it doing that? Yes.
What if you redefine and?
Well, it'll be fine there too. Actually, no, that one might break because it's in the output. There you go. Go test it. Go test it. Open an issue. There's a way to fix it.
So you do macro expansion first?
What do you mean by first?
Before you do the linking, you have to expand it so that you can figure out what each identifier is binding. So
Yeah, I'll get there. Okay. So, Resyntax, next slide. Resyntax understands scope, and it understands macros. And that's because Resyntax is a bunch of macros. It reuses Racket's macro expander to expand your program. And the refactoring rules Resyntax uses are built out of hundreds of these refactoring rules, which are defined with like a little DSL that makes it's just reusing syntax-parse. So you get the full power of Racket's macro system, including working with syntax objects, understanding scope, working with syntax properties, using syntax classes to define your rules, etc. All of the nice stuff that we use in syntax-parse, you can use to define refactoring rules. Or I can use them. So this means your syntax can do some very, very complicated and suggestions. It's got a lot of power. For instance, it can turn a let into define only when it's safe and it won't break your code. Here we've got these two functions, f and g, and the first one, f, it can be rewritten to use define instead of let there. But the second one, g, can't, because in g, the let is shadowing the outer x with an inner x. So because Resyntax uses Racket's macro expander, it knows this, and the rule for rewriting let to define will use the Racket identifier scope information to figure out when it's safe to make that change. And it will only change f and leave g alone. So I like to think of Resyntax like a teacher. It will show you how to use Racket more idiomatically and effectively. For instance, it can show you all the tips and tricks of how to use all of the hash map functions. For instance, especially for somebody coming from a different scheme, they might not realize that there's this nice hash update function that makes it super easy to just take something that's already in a hash table and update it. Resyntax can show you how to do that. And it can even, introduce a little lambda, just picks a little default variable name, and, teach you how to use that. It can also teach you how to replace complicated list processing code with Racket's generic for loops. Here, we've got it replacing a use of for each and append map and all this string to list stuff with a for loop. And it's able to, you replace the string to list conversion with the in string, so it's even faster too.
That's very cool.
Thank you. I think so too. It can also help you even if you already know all the ins and outs of Racket, and that's because it can tell you about deprecated legacy APIs that don't do anything anymore. It can run through your code and fix up places where you've used some old function that today doesn't do anything anymore. For instance, Racket has these syntax arming and disarming functions. They used to be part of the syntax taint system, which is a terrible name. But today in Racket, they don't do anything. That's because that system was reworked to a simpler model that no longer requires those functions. So those functions just do nothing now, and Resyntax can find them and get rid of them. Yes, sorry?
Do you need to analyze that the second argument is side effect free before you remove it?
I didn't bother for this rule, but the rule can. So it's up to each rule to decide whether or not that's important enough to worry about. And for the syntax disarm arming stuff, the second argument is just like some inspector, and like, who the hell uses side effects to give you an inspector?
There should be its own one.
Yeah, yes, it should. Good point. That should be its own whole warning. So, how do you question?
Yeah, I kind of wonder, are there situations where the output of this rewriting rule could be rewritten again? So I guess like instead of rewriting, it's like a set of buffers.
Okay, so the question was, are there cases where the output of a rewrite rule can be rewritten again? And yes, there are tons, especially because old Racket code, written in a very schemy way, tends to be a bunch of really, really nested lets and ifs. And Resyntax loves to just unroll that out into a big flat pile of defines and cons. And currently, Resyntax doesn't like combine multiple stages of suggestions all into one Uber suggestion because that like sounds cool, but in practice it makes it really confusing when you want to actually suggest it to people and tell them, hey, I want to make these 17 changes to this function. Is that cool with you? They're all in order.
Trust me.
So Resyntax doesn't have special handling for that, but you can just run it multiple times. So,
Question.
yes?
But is it confluent? Like, are we guaranteed that the rewrite sequence will terminate?
Is there a guarantee that rewrite sequence will terminate?
Probably not.
Not
You can
like
write arbitrary, whatever you want.
yeah. The rewrite rules are arbitrary code. So if you want to write rules that do that, you can. Which is why I don't let people write rules.
Also having one rule that expands to another rule that expands back to the first.
Yeah. There's ways this can go wrong, which is why engineering rules is a thing you have to do carefully. Yes. Another question.
If you're doing or capable of just like side effect detection, can you detect side effect free code where the value is unused?
Sometimes. The question was, can you detect side effect free code where like values are unused? I have limited ability to detect like expressions that I know are side effect free, and even then, no is a strong word. Like it'll just like look for like, oh, this is literal data. Like you wrote a literal string here. Or it'll be like, oh, you wrote a variable reference here, and I'm going to assume it's not an identifier macro that expands into some side effect code because who does that? Please don't do that. So there's like, it has like heuristics, but not proof. And they're fairly limited heuristics. Yes?
Do you find that the tool might make a suggestion which, if you accepted it, would then be criticized later? Saying, go back to the old one, or something like that.
No, and that's because I have a lot. So there's like a kind of similar couple of tools at my job that I like mess around with a lot, and I have a lot of experience writing rules that don't do that. The bigger problem is not like, will the tool suggest that you go back to the old thing before the suggestion? The bigger problem is, will the human reviewers of your code do that? For instance, I suggest, hey, you could clean this up, and then some other reviewer shows up like, no, you shouldn't do that. Go back to the old one. That happens frustratingly often. What happened to my projection?
This will come? It takes like a minute.
So, while it's coming back, are these rules context-free or context-sensitive?
These rules are syntax-parse macros.
So the reason why I asked is if you were to have that let example, let to define you had before, I could imagine you were wanting let there not just for binding, but to create a new scope where if you had a separate variable outside and inside, that scope.
Oh, yeah, the rule, so, the example
That
is,
would require context-sensitive rules.
so the example is, like, if you've got a let you want to turn to a define, but there's already a variable outside the let that, like, the scope would clash with, is that the example you were?
Yes, but not anything to do with the let itself. Right? You're just using the fact that let makes a new scope.
So there's a define inside the let.
Oh, define inside the let.
Yes.
Okay, so you got, like, some defines outside a let, some defines inside a let, and the ones inside clash the outside ones. Yes, Resyntax checks for that. And makes sure that when gets rid of a let and takes all the code inside it and unnests it, that if there's any definitions inside the let, and they won't conflict with any definitions outside the let. And it does that just using Racket's, like, bound identifier equal checks.
Okay.
Another question?
Are you handling runtime errors? Reporting of runtime errors?
Am I handling runtime errors?
Yes.
Like, in what way?
So you run a program, you transform a program, you run it, there's a runtime error.
Oh, like it changes the behavior and introduces an error?
Yeah, where is the error reported?
So you can this all lives outside the compile run cycle of your code. It's an external tool. So you would like commit the suggestion, have your new code, run it, and then it does whatever your code does and has an error.
Errors reported in the generator.
Yeah, it doesn't check that like the replacement won't cause runtime errors because it can't run arbitrary code like that. Like it doesn't imagine if it's like analyzing some code for that like interacts with a database. How's it supposed to run that without setting up a database? So that's why I had it set up as a GitHub pull request code review thing because presumably you have GitHub and you love setting up tools on your pull requests. So you've also got some CI tools that run your tests. And that's also why it's a suggestion that a human has to click and be like, yeah, this is a good idea. And now it's their responsibility instead of just in the background automatically fixing stuff. Oh, is there any other questions? Because that was...
Yeah, related to that, what are the other options besides commit suggestion?
Oh, I don't know.
Developer fatigue.
I think it lets you edit the commit message, maybe?
That sounds right. Wields does a bunch of this stuff at his job. So you can also batch up a bunch of changes, into just one commit. The GitHub integration is new, and I'm about to talk about the caveats with it. So if you want to use Resyntax, it's a little tricky right now. It's still a very experimental tool, and I'm still developing it pretty actively. There is a command line interface. You can Racket package install Resyntax. You have to install it in installation scope for silly reasons. And once you do that, you can Resyntax analyze files, directories, packages, etc. And that will analyze the code and print out the suggestions in your terminal. There's also a Resyntax fix command that will just automatically change the files. Don't do this if you don't use version control, because there's no undo. It's deferring that to a different tool.
How about an interactive mode?
Yeah, there's an issue for making an interactive fix mode. I don't want to bother with it yet because I would much rather just like get the GitHub integration working better or get like stuff working in editors better. Like there's I don't like using command lines. So speaking of the GitHub integration, it's still a work in progress and it's got some bugs that prevent it from working properly in a lot of cases. But fear not, Sam and Matthew both want this to run on typed Racket and Scribble, respectively, and run on all the pull requests to those. So we're going to get the kinks worked out eventually, and it will hopefully end up reviewing all the pull requests to those. And once I've got that working, it'll be a lot easier to figure out the path to like giving you all an easy way to set it up in your repositories.
So these are the repositories for type Racket and Scribble, which themselves are mostly Racket.
Yes.
What
Yes.
about like Hashlang Scribble?
I got a slide for that. We'll get there.
I think relatedly, maybe I've got my own weird bespoke style. Is it going to be difficult for me to write my own sets of rules for arbitrary hashlang and arbitrary reader?
So the question is, if you got your own weird bespoke style, you want to write your own rules for arbitrary langs and readers and stuff, I got a slide for that too. Another question in the back.
Have you tried running it on like professional Racket, like the tech Racket and Scribble repos?
Yes. Have I tried running it on professional Racket? Yes, I have run Resyntax on various Racket repositories in the main Racket organization and like sent some pull requests that like was just Resyntax cleaning up a bunch of like 15-year-old Scribble code. that was some of the early work I did to actually get the damn fixed mode working.
Do you use this at Google at all?
Do I use this at Google? No, Google doesn't touch Racket at all. Well, they probably do. It's like, it's like billions of lines of code. So I'm sure they use it somewhere. In fact, I know one other person at Google who uses Racket, it's Lawrence, and I think he uses it for some like experimental script stuff. But no, there's no infrastructure at Google for working with Racket, and I don't want to be. They can keep their job. So, future work. What next? I got a lot of plans for this, and with luck, maybe some of them will work out. First, I really want to bring Resyntax to editors. Like, first Dr. Racket, then the world's. You should be able to see suggestions from Resyntax in Dr. Racket automatically and just like click the button in there to fix it. And I also want to work with the Racket language server protocol implementation. That way, we will get Resyntax automatically in any editor that hooks up to a language server to a language server, including VS Code. I think Emacs has ways to do that. Vim does. There's like NeoVim too, and there's a bajillion other editors that understand that. So that would let Resyntax work with all of those editors. And someday, I kind of even want it to like be in the main distribution and on by default, so you don't have to show students how to set this up. Because it's a teaching tool. It can't be a good teaching tool if it takes 20 minutes of screwing around in the command line to get it working. And language-oriented programming. Oh, you have a question, Robbie?
Just thinking about integration with editors. Can you specify like how to adjust the indentation?
How to adjust the indentation? No, Resyntax is currently a very zero config thing. It does what it does, and you take it or leave it.
And the rules could specify how the indentation of the resulting.
Can each rule in Resyntax specify indentation? Yes, the rules have a little control over the formatting and indentation of their output. I kind of actually would like to someday get rid of that, though, and have languages just give me some auto formatter I can use to get rid of that stuff. Which gets me to our next slide. Language-oriented refactoring. We got this great language-oriented programming thing in Racket. You can make your own langs, you can make your own macros and DSLs, you can mix up langs, your langs can use whatever syntax they want. Resyntax doesn't understand any of that. Currently, it will only work if your code is in hashlang Racket base. It won't even work if it's in hashlang Racket. And I've thought about this problem a lot, and my conclusion is, yeah, I can do that. There's a lot of very complicated problems to solve. Like, we need a way for languages to tell tools, hey, here's how you should format code in my language if you happen to construct code programmatically instead of a human typing it. And I really hope figure some stuff out about that, go watch his talk on his auto formatter.
Yeah, the answer is yes. See my talk tomorrow.
Yes, see Sorby's talk, please. And thank you, Sorby. I'm counting on you. Slow me down. Because I don't want to have to figure all this out myself. So that's the thing I want eventually, but there's plenty to do today first. The other big thing. Oh, question?
What about like hashing Racket is so different from Racket base that makes it not work for?
So, question is, why is hashling Racket so different from hashling Racket base that Resyntax won't touch it? It's not. I just was. I made that decision early on in the very, very initial part of the program, where the project, where I was like, okay, I just want to be able to run this on Scribble and like not care if they've done something weird. And so I didn't want to like make a rule that only works in hashling Racket because it assumes some stuff is imported that will then break if you try and apply it to hashling Racket base. I didn't want to have to accidentally create that problem. Another question, Jeff? Yes?
Or just time.
Oh. Library defined refactoring rules. This is where we're at. Okay. So, just like there's like some language specific concerns about this, there's also like libraries that are very complicated. For instance, Key, or however it's pronounced. It's a really, really cool library that gives you this very nice like flow-oriented DSL for doing like generic programming. It's very cool. I don't know how to use it. And that's not because it's like too complex. It's just that it's a big library and I've not bothered to use it. So I haven't researched it. But I would really like for Key to be able to tell me how to use it by integrating with Resyntax and giving me suggestions when I do things that could be simplified. So Resyntax doesn't support this yet, but it's a thing I do want eventually, a way for libraries to give me to like export refactoring rules that Resyntax just picks up automatically. And that way, anyone using Key would just start getting these better, improved suggestions about how to use Key better automatically without having to configure some extra Key-specific stuff. It would just be on the library owner's responsibility to set that up. And ideally, that should work even if the same library is being used by multiple different languages. For instance, if I'm using some library in regular Racket versus typed Racket, maybe, or if I'm using it versus regular Racket versus Rhombus, the new scary thing, which doesn't even have syntax. Resyntax should be able to take the rules that the library exports and the user's code and the language's auto-formatting information and just combine all those together to give you what you need for the user that's specific to their language and the libraries they're using. It doesn't do that, but I want it to. This is going to bring up a lot of difficult conversations. For instance, first off, how do you even know if a suggestion is a good idea? Because we're not going to agree on that. And that's, in my experience with tools of this kind at Google, actually the most difficult part is figuring out how to solve the problem of the person who made this tool thinks it's a good idea, but nobody agrees with them. And because if you do that, it means that the tools can't be on by default and become these highly customizable, super extensible things that you have to do a lot of work to set up. And now the tool is not helpful to new people anymore. So we gotta, as a community, figure out how we're gonna decide on what are good ideas and good suggestions. How do we balance the concerns between people using libraries and languages and the people creating them? And how do we deal with, how do we balance between users who want to extend and customize and write in their own idiomatic style and having any sort of consistent style in the community and not fragmenting a bunch? We're gonna have to figure that out. I haven't yet, certainly. I have ideas. call to action. Give it a try, at least the command line interface. I'm always open to suggestions about better ways rules can be improved, new rules, and I've tried to make it pretty easy to go into the code for Resyntax and make your own rule and send me a pull request if you want to. And I'm not Jack on the Racket Discord. You can always ask me about it there. Oh, and go see Soroway's talk about the Hornet.
We'll be here tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You guys see that talk. It's and special thanks to lots of folks who really helped me with contributions and feedback and ideas. And huge thanks to Jesse for organizing RacketCon. I'm so excited to be here. Let's give him a hand.